A while back, I bought an Oliver OC-3. It didn't run and had a few other issues, but it had Nissan diesel swapped into it. So I got it running, and then made a few improvements here and there, and now it's time to finish it up. There are a few luxury items I want to add later, like a charging system and gauges, and a starter switch that doesn't involve alligator clips. Now this charging system has never worked. I pulled off the radiator hose because I already know this is leaking. I think there's probably a crack in the hose somewhere there. And now I can get to the alternator easier. There's something a little unusual about these alternators. On these Nissan diesels, they have a vacuum pump on the back of the alternator. That's mainly used to power the power brakes. As you can see, it's just blocked off here. I don't need that. A lot of people had problems with the vacuum pumps because they are oiled. There's the oil feed line, there's the return line. A lot of people had these leak, much like that big wet area of oil right there. And if something happens with this line and it breaks off, you could dump all your oil right out and not even know about it. And I'm not even using it. This alternator is from a gas version of the truck, and it does not have the vacuum pump on the back, which means I can eliminate all those lines and have less potential problems. Got the alternator in. Now I'm going to get that radiator hose replaced. Now this was definitely spliced together, but I know that engine's from an early 80s Datsun pickup. So I bought a replacement hose for one of those. Looks like this might be close enough. We're gonna need to steal that 90 out of here. That's a well-made piece. They even did the beading and everything. I took off little bits of hose here and there, and finally I came up with one I think will work. The old hose had some rubber protective sleeves on it in place where it was close to rubbing. You can see the gouge there where they did their job. Being rubber on rubber, they don't slide on easy. So I'm just using a little soap and water, which is always handy to have around. And they can slide on with reasonable ease. Now I can put this thing on there. Now another issue I had is my entire electrical system consisted of one button on alligator clips to the starter. So I'm going to add a little more, like maybe an actual real switch and maybe some gauges, all that dashboard kind of stuff. This is the dashboard out of that FC-150 that became the covered wagon. It's a forward cab. This one has been gutted. And this is where that piece of dashboard came from. My dad repurposed and used in a bus. I'm going to take off this entire dashboard, so I'm repurposing a repurposed old part. Seeing how this came out of a truck made in the 50s, it's got the right curvature and sort of fits the style of this machine. I don't need that many gauges, but I think I'll take a chunk of it, put it somewhere around there. I drew a line where it looked like the dash should end, so I'm just going to trim it off right there and hope I got it right. On this old dashboard, this section has a nice curve that I like. This end that I cut off has nothing. I'm trying to use the old bit of dash. This piece used to go here. I'm going to move it down here. I'm going to try to use pieces of the dash that I cut off to recreate that piece on this side. Making a few pie slices. Dropping the piece. I'm making a few pie slices here to try to get a curve. I have one piece remaining and it's not big enough to fill up that ashtray spot. Luckily I have some sheet left over from the mini camper project. We're just going to make some new panels here. Just putting the edge under the lip and forcing it around. That gives me roughly the right contour. Something along that line. There's a kind of sharp bend right at the bottom here, so I need a sharp edge to make a sharp bend. Bent a little too far, but once I get the front part welded in, I can just bend it back out and it should all fit. For some reason, I ran out of shielding gas. Welding stores aren't open this time of night. On to the flux core. This isn't going to be pretty, but it will get done. I'm adding a piece of 1 by 1/8 inch flat stock with some holes on the ends. They'll go all the way across and add a little bracing and mounting tabs. Now this is the time in the regular YouTube video where the guy shows you how it comes out perfectly. Mine doesn't. It's lumpy, it's bumpy, I burned holes through it. It's pretty ugly. But I got one more trick up my sleeve. Fiberglass filled Bondo. We'll put a liberal amount on here. Couldn't find a Bondo paddle, so old piece of sheet metal looks like it'll work fine. Let that sit for a few minutes. The Bondo's got to the cheesy phase, so I'm going to use a wood rasp and get it rough to shape. Now using a flat surface like this, you can go from the high spots of lumpy weld to other high spots of lumpy weld, and it gives a pretty straight line. That way you can actually pretend your surface is straight. I've roughed it out, but the most important thing at this sort of cheesy soft phase is do not finish it. It's not strong enough yet to actually get the final shape. It's burrito time. I'll come back when I'm done. The burrito has been eaten, and the Bondo is completely hard now. And here we have the final dashboard. Not perfect, but definitely in the good enough range. Holds everything I need and keeps the back of the gauges and all the wiring protected from water and sun. I've got some of the wiring done. I only have 2 buttons here. That one's the starter. This one is glow plugs. And notice that light came on here. It'd be easy to run power from the output of the switch to the light to say when the button's pressed. But that doesn't tell me they're on. This is a solenoid that actually turns on the glow plugs. And I took the signal for the light off the output of the solenoid. So that light tells me that the actual glow plugs are getting power through the solenoid. I'm going to try dealing with my glow plug issue here. I pulled out 2 of them. I want to test and see if they work at all. I also have one brand new one to compare it to. You can get a good idea what you got while it's still in the engine, because these are basically a resistor heating element. You've got a ground where it bolts in, you got power going to it. If you check the resistance, you'll know whether or not that element is passing current. So hook up our ground, hook up our power wire. We've got less than 1 ohm. Here's a fairly old looking one, over 200 ohms of resistance. Now this one looks like it's been replaced, but when I pulled it out, I saw a small burn mark in it. So I don't have high hopes for this one. It's showing 125, but that's kilo ohms now. This thing is not going to pass any electricity at all through it. I made up a test rig just to double check. I've got a positive terminal, some heavy gauge wire with a connector on the end, so I can attach it to my glow plug, and then a nut with the right thread to simulate the engine block where it screws in. Now all I have to do is hit that nut on the negative terminal here. We got nothing. No sparks, no arcing. That's not doing anything at all. This is the one that looked like it's been replaced, a Champion CH75, so I know that's not a factory one, but it is not good. This one looks old enough it could be a factory one. This is the one with 200 ohms. Let's try it out. I don't see any sparks coming off it, so that's probably dead. Yeah, that's not even warm. Another bad glow plug. Now we're going to test the new one. I see a spark. See how it's glowing red at the end? That'll actually start an engine. As I pull them out, I'm going to test them and make sure that they really don't work before I replace them. These things are like 20 bucks a pop. But we'll make sure we get a set of 4 in there that work. Now it's time to wire up my alternator. Now you may notice this is a different alternator than the one I just installed. That's because I made a mistake with the first one. With all my changing over and crossovering parts numbers, I somehow managed to get an externally regulated alternator. There are a few different alternators that look the same, but if the terminals are labeled F and N, it doesn't regulate the voltage itself. Which means you need to wire in an extra regulator in order to use this alternator. So I went ahead and swapped it out for an internally regulated alternator, but since I eliminated the vacuum pump, I have a new problem. I have an open hole to the engine that's going to spew oil out as soon as it pressurizes, and another open hole to the engine that's going to suck in directly to the crankcase. And I'm going to plug those up in a way that turns on this alternator. Now this is an oil pressure operated switch. I've used these before for electric fuel pumps, so that way if the engine dies, it kills the fuel pump. But in this case, I'm going to use it to turn on that alternator. So when I have oil pressure, it turns on the alternator, and when I lose my oil pressure, it turns it off. And it isn't threading in. The pitch looks the same over this short distance, so that should be okay. But I measured the diameter. It's around 374. This new pressure switch is like 395. So it's about 20 thou bigger. I could make the hole in the block bigger, but I'd rather make this smaller. Now the good thing is these threads are tapered. So I'm going to use a die for a pipe thread and go ahead and go a little further, and that'll make the end smaller. I'm going till the fitting sticks out of the die just slightly. That's as small as I'm going to be able to get it. I took off almost 10 thou out of that 20 difference. Hopefully this will do it. Oh, yep, that started. Let's throw some wires on there. You'll notice there's one extra wire coming out of the switch side, and that's the side that's going to turn the alternator on. So this will only be live with oil pressure. That's going to my voltmeter. These draw juice all the time they're reading. Doesn't draw very much, but eventually it'll run a battery dead. So now that voltmeter will only read while the engine has oil pressure. The hole in the bottom is just getting a regular pipe plug. That would be a good place to put a oil return line for a turbo when I decide to blow up my transmission. I've been fiddling with the alternator wiring here, but every time I test fire the engine, the exhaust that exits right here sort of blows in the area I'm working, and that's getting kind of annoying. So I'm going to reroute the exhaust. I wanted to go up initially and come right out of the hood somewhere, but this is just going all the wrong angle. I have to go down and in and over and up, and then there's these loader arms to contend with that keep going in that area every time I use it, and I want to keep that working. But as I was looking around, I realized it's going forward, but it could easily go down. So I'm going to try running the exhaust underneath. Now we're on a hunt for exhaust pipes. Those are way too big. Definitely don't need an oxygen sensor. That could be useful. There's a tiny little muffler. I think that came off a 2-liter diesel. That might be just right. This is the piece that's off this machine, and I want that straight section to be a little longer before it bends. This is a piece I cut out of that exhaust pipe I found, and it looks like the exact right diameter. Also, there's more length to a bend. It looks like this is a sleeve that slid over this pipe and welded along the edge. Well, attack welds on the inside too. Let's take care of those. There we go. There. Got a new head pipe. Just gotta weld the seam. Now we have a brand new rusty old exhaust. I even snuck in a brace that goes to the chassis so it doesn't flop around. And the side exit is tucked inside the track so it can't get caught in anything. I've never worked with these Hitachi alternators before. The wiring is a little different than I'm used to, but I got it figured out, and let me show you what I've got here. Now there's 4 connections total. One of them is the ground. You could run a separate one, they've got a terminal for it, but this is bolted right to the block, and since there's no computer, I think that'll be fine. Then you have the main power wire that actually is the charging that goes to your battery. That's pretty obvious. There are 2 wires that are less obvious. They're little ones up here. The terminal's T-shaped. The flat on the top is a sensing wire. Now that one is one that goes to your system somewhere and picks that voltage to set what this charges at. If your system's running the same voltage everywhere, you can hook it anywhere you want. You can go straight to the main power terminal. That's fine. If you're running a lot of draw and the voltage actually falls from the alternator to the battery, you probably want that wire to go to the battery. If you have it mounted up close to the alternator where the voltage is highest, it might not know you need more charging, and you don't get as much as you could potentially get out of the alternator. But for me, I'm not running much load, so I'm just going to wire it up to my simulated ignition switch here. Now the other one below that, the vertical part of the T, is the lamp wire, which goes to the lamp on the dashboard that tells you whether or not you're charging. It didn't seem important to me at first, but this alternator will not turn on unless it has that. and you can't just hook power straight to it. That'll be too much power. So the light bulb is actually a critical part of the entire charging system. Now I have that hooked to my simulated ignition switch also. So we turn on our ignition and power connects to the sense wire, so it just picks up that voltage. It goes through the lamp, illuminates the lamp because that lamp wire is grounding it out. We're going to start the engine up. Initially the lamp has power on one side and then the alternator is a ground on the other. Once the alternator starts producing electricity, both sides of the lamp are positive, so it goes out. And our battery is charging. Now one major flaw in this setup is if that bulb burns out, your charging system turns off. But the designers realized that, and they put a resistor in parallel with that bulb. Which makes me think, I don't actually need the bulb. All I need is a resistor. We're going to replace this lamp with a resistor. Now it used to be that getting a resistor is as simple as going to your nearest Radio Shack. It's actually harder to get electronic stuff these days. Luckily, I hoard that kind of thing too. I've got a selection to work with. I already dug through this box. I found a 100 ohm resistor. I think this is left over from a Mega Squirt I built years ago. And I'm going to put that in place of this light bulb. Our switch power is going to come in here, and the sense wire is just going to get that straight. And the lamp power is going to go to the same switch connection, just running through a resistor. And this should be all we need. The resistor is in place, and then the oil pressure switch is acting like the ignition switch. It's charging nicely. I'm going to go ahead and shut it off. While we have oil pressure, we still have voltage. The oil pressure drops, shuts down the system. I don't like the resistor just hanging out there. Generally, you don't want to enclose resistors because they dissipate heat as they operate. This one's only used to start up the system, and then it no longer has current flowing through it. So I'm going to try sliding a piece of heat shrink tubing over the whole mess. See our little resistor in there? Everything is sealed up tight. I'm going to go ahead and try this out and let you know whether or not it works. So if nothing else, we'll learn something. This right here is a lever that shuts off this injector pump and actually shuts down the engine. This is my cable that goes to it. It's not actually connected anywhere along the cable. It just sort of flops there. The first part of its travel is just making it flop around. And once you pull it out of its holder, then it'll actually shut off the engine. Since that's the only way to shut off this engine, I probably should do something better. On my new dashboard, I got this fancy new cable with a nice big easy grip handle. And so I'm going to attach this one here. But I don't want it flopping around, which means I need a bracket somewhere here. There's a couple bolts I could bolt a bracket to, but I don't want to loosen up anything that seals the injector pump because it works and I don't want to create problems. I do see two holes right here that aren't being used for anything. So we're going to make a bracket for there. Take a piece of 3/4 angle, popped a couple holes in it. I put it at a slight upwards angle because it looks like these are a little bit below there. Found a cable clamp lying on my workbench. I think that was left over from the snowmobile project. But I put that a little bit further back so that way the cable has some flex. That way it doesn't have a problem lining up. Cable's bolted on, make sure I have plenty of slack. Now I'm going to cut off the excess. Usual triangular file method. The outer part of the cable is made with wire just spiraled around. So I just use a file to make a groove that goes through the wire in one place and the whole thing will slide off. If you use a cutoff wheel or anything, it's really easy to nick the inner cable. Now we just pull off the excess here. Just going to wrap this around a few times. Put on a washer. There's a cotter pin in the end. Alright, now let's see how it works. There we go. Now it's just a little pull, a lot less travel needed. You know, I'm really going all out on a project when I pop for a new air filter. The old one was a little dirty. Probably still could be rebuilt though. I'll save it for later. I already lubricated these bottom rollers with the gear oil that's supposed to go in them, but they're leaking. I did hear a lot of comments mentioning this John Deere cornhead grease. And this is supposed to lubricate like a gear oil, but stay inside seals like a grease. So we're going to pump these full of that and see how that works. This track looked a little saggy. I'm going to try to adjust it if I can get the adjuster to move. It's kind of rusty. I made this extremely safe and secure setup. Oh, that's sizzling nicely. Adjustable didn't work. Couldn't fit the pipe wrench on there. Yeah, that's not going anywhere. Let's see how bad of an idea this turns out to be. I put enough force on this, I feel like I'm at the point where I'm about to break it. And that's the last thing I want to do. Now what I have to do is move that wheel assembly forward on this track. And that's the screw that's meant to do it. But it doesn't mean I have to use that screw. These little screw jacks are handy. There's a shaft that goes through the center there and goes into this piece. Basically I just need to hold that gap. I found these in my bin. That should work. We'll just slide the shims in there. I got 2 shims in there. That looks way better. I think we got it. With that last bit, I'm calling this project done. Which means it's time to load up on a trailer and get it out of here. And now, I'm going to put it to work at the mine. One of my immediate concerns is this bridge area. It doesn't look that deep on camera. It's not shallow. That's a pretty decent sized drop off. It looks like that's the edge when you go driving through. But hidden behind these bushes are big washout areas. So I want to fill those up first to make sure no one accidentally drives into one of those holes and off the edge. I've been working it for about an hour, and the vitals look fine. This is a handy lifting ring. Just going to do a little reorganizing here. Then on to another project I need to take care of. All the big piles of furniture are gone, so that's good. A few strange, unknown things. Now I gotta do the final cleanup of all this stuff. Luckily, I have the right tool for the job. Previously, I noticed an old Jeepster up here. I figured I should drag it out into the open so that it's easier to see. It definitely needs some work. I'm gonna have to think about what to do with this one. Now, I originally thought this was rust-free. I do see some rust up in this upper corner, probably from when it was upside down. The floor pan looks totally solid, but, you know, a little bent up. The paint code, 226, trim, 272, and something else is 13. Oh, looks like someone had a fire extinguisher mounted for safety. Oh, it was a V6 model. This would have had the Buick V6 in it. Obviously a manual transmission because we have the clutch master cylinder. That looks like it's a VIN number. That is also looks like it is a pre-standardized VIN number. So I'll look it up later. I'm guessing this is late 60s. I'm not sure what happened to this Jeep, but my guess There's all the mountains around here. Someone drove it up one of them and rolled it down. Hopefully they got out in time. Some of those are a long way down. Well, that's it for this video. This machine worked great. You've just seen little clips of what's happened. I've ran this thing for hours and hours and hours. And it ran fine, no problems. Never got too warm, about 160 at the most. Oil pressure was fine, charged fine. Everything worked great. One minor issue I had is when I started it cold, it would start up on 3 cylinders and take a while for that 4th to cut in. You might have seen that when I was loading one of those electrical boxes. Now, I don't know if that's because of the altitude, we're over 7,000 feet, or because it's cold. It's actually snowing outside. That's a minor issue. Even on 3 cylinders, it has way more power than it ever did originally. So we're just going to ignore that entirely. I'm real happy with this one. It works great, and it's a lot of fun to drive. Hope you guys are having fun too, and we'll see you next time. I'm also leaving a Jeep up here. You guys may have seen this one. It's my 5-speed swap 4-liter ZJ. It's been my daily driver for almost 10 years. It'll be a good all-around reliable vehicle to leave up here, so when I get here, I got something to run around with. Which means I'm going to need to make myself a new daily driver. But that'll be a different video.